The first thing they did was calculate, not whether to bid. That decision had already been made before the lot stepped onto the platform. The calculation was simpler and crueler than that. It was the calculation of a room full of people who had spent the evening purchasing human beings and were now looking at one they had collectively decided did not meet the threshold. The man in the front row did it with his eyes. A single sweep, top to bottom. The practiced assessment of someone who had reduced this particular transaction to an art form. Then he turned to the woman beside him and shook his head. Barely, the smallest motion. The motion of a man who has seen the merchandise and found it beneath his standards. That was enough. That was how it traveled. One head shake to the next pair of eyes, one murmured assessment to the next ear, moving through the room the way cold moves through a building when someone has left a window open. Not announced, not dramatic, simply present everywhere at once by the time you notice it. The room had decided before the auctioneer cleared his throat. The woman on the platform had not been told about the decision. She did not need to be. She could feel it the way you feel weather, in the quality of the air, how in the particular silence that descended when she walked out from the holding corridor and stepped up onto the wooden platform and stood under the industrial lights in a dress that was not hers and feet that were bare on cold concrete. She felt the room make up its mind about her in the space of 4 seconds. She let it. Her name was Lola Adeyemi. She was 23 years old. She had been in the United States for 11 months, in captivity for 4 of them, and in this specific warehouse in Queens for 6 hours. She weighed less than she had ever weighed as an adult, because they fed you enough to keep you functional, and not 1 calorie beyond that. Her wrists carried bruises in the yellow-purple spectrum of injuries that were days old. The specific coloration of zip ties applied and reapplied until the skin gave up protesting and simply documented the damage. Her natural coils were pulled back with an elastic that was not hers. Her feet were bare because someone had decided bare feet were more efficient than shoes for a lot that was expected to sell quickly. She was 7 months pregnant. This was visible. There was no garment made that could have hidden it, and they had not tried very hard. The gray shift dress was large and shapeless, and still could not conceal the swell of her belly, round and full and undeniably alive in a room that contained very little that was either. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her spine straight and her eyes fixed on the far wall. Not because she was performing dignity, because she had learned, over 23 years of being in rooms that did not want her, that the only thing that belonged entirely to her was the way she held her own body. They were not going to have that. The auctioneer cleared his throat. He was a thin man with expensive glasses and the particular cultivated vacancy of someone who had made a decision about what he was doing a long time ago and charged a fee to maintain it. "Final lot of the evening," he said. "Female, 23, Nigerian national, 7 months gestation. No documentation. No country of origin on file. Sold as is. Opening bid 15,000. Silence. Not the silence of consideration. The textured, the weighted silence of a room that had already spoken without words. It settled over the metal folding chairs and the velvet ropes and the champagne flutes like something cold and final. The silence of 100 people looking at a human being and deciding, collectively, without discussion, that she was not worth the breath it would take to raise a hand. 10,000. The auctioneer tried. His voice had thinned. Surely. The man in the front row, cream linen suit, gold watch, full the sprawling self-satisfaction of someone who had spent $42,000 earlier in the evening and considered himself a man of discernment, leaned to the woman beside him. He did not lower his voice. He had never once in his life calibrated his volume for the benefit of the person being discussed. "Who brings a pregnant one?" he said. "That's not a purchase. That's a complication with a 9-week countdown." The woman beside him, emerald silk, a leather portfolio open on her lap like she was auditing inventory, smiled. It was the smile of someone who found the observation mildly clever and the situation beneath further engagement. She wrote something in the portfolio. What she wrote was not a bid. 5,000. Ladies and gentlemen, 5,000, surely. 500. The voice came from the left side of the room. A man in a gray jacket, mid-50s, as drunk enough that his grin sat crooked on his face and he had stopped noticing. He was already standing, already pointing, at the platform, at her, the loose, confident point of a man who had never once aimed a finger at something that pointed back. 500, he said again, louder, warming to the sound of his own voice. "And everybody here can watch me?" The laughter that followed was the loudest thing that had happened all evening. It came from every corner of the room at once, and it hit her from every direction, from the left and the right and the front and the high steel rafters that bounced it back down, amplified. It was the laughter of a room that had found, in the space between a drunk man's sentence and its ending, permission to be exactly what it was. She absorbed it. The way stone absorbs rain. No expression crossed her face. No muscle moved. No part of her gave the room what it was looking for. The flinch, the downward gaze, the hunched shoulders of a person trying to become smaller. She stood with her spine straight and her chin level and her hands exactly where they were. She looked at the back wall of the warehouse and she went somewhere else. She went to Lagos, her mother's kitchen on Lagos Island, the window that looked over the street below where the Okada riders wove between the yellow buses, the smell of egusi thick in the warm air, the sound of her mother's voice low and certain, Miss singing something old and Yoruba that Lola had never learned the full words to, but knew by feel, by the shape it made in her chest when she heard it. Her mother's hands braiding her hair at the kitchen table. The generator humming in the evening because the light had gone again. The feeling, specific, irreplaceable, the feeling of being a child in a place that was entirely and completely hers, of being known. Mama. The word lived in her chest like a stone she had been carrying so long it had become part of her skeleton. She was there, in that kitchen, in that smell, in the sound of her mother's voice, when the silence came. Not gradual, total. The laughter did not taper, did not trail off at the edges the way laughter does when it has run its course. It stopped. All at once, completely, the way a power line stops when it is cut. Not a fade, a severance. One moment, the room was full of the sound of itself, and the next moment, there was nothing. The drunk man's grin collapsed in real time. The woman with the portfolio stopped writing. The auctioneer opened his mouth, and whatever lived in his lungs evacuated without producing language. Into the silence, from the back of the room, a voice said, 50 million. She did not turn immediately. She had learned not to react to things immediately. Reaction was data surrendered freely, and she had spent 4 months in rooms where data surrendered freely was data used against you. She counted to 3. Old habit, her mother's trick for the moments when the world moved faster than wisdom. And then she turned her eyes toward the back of the warehouse. He was standing just inside the loading dock entrance, far enough from the industrial lights that they caught him in fragments, the angle of a jaw, the line of shoulders, the particular way a person stands when they have been, for a very long time, the most dangerous presence in every room they enter, and have stopped needing to announce this because the room always figures it out. He was not moving. He was not scanning the crowd. He was not doing any of the things a person did when they had just spoken a number that stopped a room. He was still, not the stillness of someone waiting, the stillness of something that had already decided. His hands were in his pockets. His face, what she could see of it from the platform, was arranged with the complete, deliberate calm of a man who is applying significant internal force to the maintenance of his external expression. She could not see his eyes from this distance. She could feel them. 50 million, he said again. Same volume, same register. The tone of a man for whom repetition is a formality, he extends exactly once and finds mildly insulting to require. The auctioneer's professionalism cracked audibly. Wait, sir, 50, that is, the opening bid was 15,000, sir. 50 million. Is there? Ladies and gentlemen, is there a counter? Nobody moved. The man in the cream linen was studying his own hands with sudden intense focus. The drunk in the gray jacket had sat down so completely he seemed to be attempting to merge with his chair. The woman in emerald had closed the portfolio. Then she is mine, the voice said. He walked forward. The crowd did not part for him. It compressed, drew back against itself, tightening inward, the involuntary physical grammar of people who have encountered a gravitational field stronger than their own and are responding at the level of the body before the mind has finished its assessment. It was not courtesy. It was not respect. It was the specific, uncontrollable contraction of prey in the presence of something their nervous systems had already correctly identified. He stopped at the foot of the platform and looked up at her. She looked down at him. And this was the moment she would return to later in the weeks that followed and examine from every angle, trying to locate the thing that had happened in it. Because something had happened. Not in the room, between them. In the 4 feet of air between the platform and the warehouse floor. Between his eyes looking up and her eyes looking down. Something had moved. Some current, and some information exchanged below the level of language. The kind of communication that happens between bodies before minds have had the chance to complicate it. He was tall, lean in the specific way of a person from whom every unnecessary thing had been stripped, leaving only what was essential and what was sharp. Dark hair pushed back from a face of clean, severe angles. Jaw, cheekbones, the straight, uncompromising line of his brows. His eyes were dark and set deep, and they were looking at her with an expression that was not pity. She was grateful. She had received pity in this room before, in the weeks before this night, from guards who felt something looking at her belly and expressed it in the useless currency of apologetic glances. Pity was contempt wearing a softer coat. This was not pity. This was... She did not have an immediate word for it. She filed the absence of a word and continued. 2 assistants moved toward the platform from the sides. They reached for her arms. She pulled back. Not with panic, with precision. The sharp, total withdrawal of someone who has had enough hands on her body without permission that the reflex has been trained to bone-deep instinct. Fast and absolute and completely controlled. He saw it. She watched him see it. Watched his eyes track the movement of her wrists folding against her body. The bruises? The flinch she had converted into a step before it could register as a flinch. She watched something happen in his jaw. A tightening. The kind of tightening that happened when a person absorbed something that required absorbing. Do not touch her. His voice dropped exactly half a register. Not loud, more precise. The sentence of a man who has reduced his available restraint to this specific volume and this specific clarity, and is using both of them because the alternative is something the room would not recover from. She walks on her own. Now step back. The assistants stepped back so fast, one of them stumbled. She looked at him. He looked at her. You don't have to come down, he said, quieter, for her only. The room had ceased to exist in his address. There was the platform, and there was the concrete below it, and there was her, and the rest was furniture. But if you want to, the way down is yours. Nobody touches you. She stepped off the platform. Her bare feet hit the concrete, and the cold shot up through her soles and her legs, and she absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, registered, filed, continued. She walked toward him, not because she trusted him, because every other direction in this room was a worse option, and she had spent 4 months making decisions in the grammar of least bad, and this was the least bad direction available. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see his face properly, close enough to confirm what she had assessed from the platform, that the expression on it was not the expression of a man who had just made a purchase. It was the expression of a man who had just ended something he found intolerable and was now, for the first time since he walked through those loading dock doors, unsure of what happened next. Why? She said. Her voice was flat. 4 days of silence, and her throat was dry, and it came out lower than intended, but it came out steady, which was the only thing that mattered. He looked at her. He looked at the room. One slow pass, taking in all of it. The cream linen and the emerald silk, and the drunk man and the auctioneer, and the champagne glasses and the velvet ropes, and all the specific props of a horror that had been arranged to look like an event. He looked back at her. Because I could not sit there anymore, he said. Not because I wanted to. Not because you needed help. Not any of the sentences a man said when he wanted credit for what he had done. Just the plain, stripped fact of it. A threshold reached, a limit crossed. A man who had run out of the capacity to remain a witness. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. She filed it. She would examine it later, in the quiet, when she had enough distance from the adrenaline to think in straight lines. Right now, there was only the cold concrete under her feet, and the warehouse behind her, and the city somewhere beyond these walls that she had not seen in 4 months. Then let's go, she said. If you are new to this channel, welcome. You walked in at exactly the right moment. Subscribe and turn on your notifications, because what follows this night will change everything you think you know about these 2 people. For everyone who has been here, you already know we don't do simple. Let's continue. The car was warm. She did not expect that. She did not know why she did not expect it. Cars were warm. This was not a revelation. This was a basic fact about vehicles. But her body did not know that anymore. Her body had recalibrated over 4 months to expect cold from every surface, to brace before contact, to receive warmth as an anomaly to be investigated rather than a comfort to be accepted. When she sat in the back seat and the heat from the leather came up through the thin fabric of the shift dress and into her legs, she had to press her teeth together and look at the tinted window and perform, for herself, a small and private act of maintenance. She was not going to come apart in this car. She placed her hands flat on her thighs, pressed down, the physical ballast she had developed in the facility, the sensation of her own palms, her own pressure, proof that the body was still under her management. She breathed. She looked at her reflection in the dark window, ghost of herself, the swell of her belly visible even in the dim glass, the bruises on her wrists catching faint light. He sat in the front passenger seat. He had not gotten in the back with her. She noticed this immediately and filed it with the same attention she had applied to every detail since he appeared at the back of that warehouse. He sat in front. He did not turn around. He did not watch her in the rear-view mirror. He took out a phone and made a call. Low Korean, rapid, the specific cadence of a man issuing instructions to people who had already been told what the consequences of misunderstanding looked like. The driver was younger, mid-30s, so an easy-faced Korean man whose eyes had found hers in the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second when she got in. Not assessment, not pity. A nod, small, direct, the nod of a person acknowledging that another person existed. It was the most human gesture anyone had directed at her in 4 months, and it came from a stranger in a car, and she did not know what to do with that information, so she simply kept it. She looked at the back of the man in the front seat. She was constructing him from the available data. This was what she did, had always done, long before captivity made it a survival skill. She arranged information into structure. She had done it in the library in Lagos as a child, working through books 3 levels above her grade because the structure of knowledge was the most reliable home she had ever found. She had done it in secondary school, in university. I'm in the fellowship program at NYU that had brought her to this country 11 months ago. She did it now. The data. He had arrived at the auction after the bidding had begun. He had positioned himself at the back, not among the buyers. The position of an observer, not a participant. He had bid once, preemptively, at a number so far beyond the room's scale that it functioned not as a bid, but as a termination. He had not touched her. He had instructed others not to touch her. He had gotten into the front seat of his own car and given her the back, alone, without explanation or negotiation. He had said, "Because I could not sit there anymore." She turned this over, examined it from multiple angles. A man who attended an underground auction and found it intolerable was not a man who attended underground auctions regularly by choice, which meant he had been there for a different reason, which meant she was not the reason he came, which meant the $50 million was not a plan. It was a response. A man whose response to witnessing something unconscionable was to pay $50 million, had $50 million available as an impulsive response, which told her something about the scale of what she was sitting 3 feet behind, and he had said his name in the car without hesitation, without performance. The name of a man who did not need to perform his own name because the name had already done whatever work it was going to do in every room that mattered. Kang Min-jun. She did not know the name. She had not been in the kind of rooms where that name was known. But she was beginning to understand the shape of what it meant. He ended the call. The car moved through Queens at midnight. The city outside the tinted windows doing what New York did, numb, indifferent and continuous and magnificent in its refusal to pause for the specific details of the people passing through it. She had loved this city once. 7 months ago, newly arrived. New fellowship, new life being assembled from the careful plans she had been making since she was 14 years old in Lagos, and decided that medicine was what she was going to do with the stubbornness her mother had given her. She had loved it before it swallowed her. The others, she said. He half turned, Not fully. The angle of his profile in the front seat light. What others? The facility where they kept me. There are 4 other women still there. She kept her voice even. This was not a request. This was information she was delivering, because it required delivery. Not the auction. The holding facility. Newark. A warehouse complex off Route 1, 2 buildings, connected underground. 4 women. I was taken tonight. They are still there. The silence that followed had weight. She could feel him processing. Not slowly, not with the laborious consideration of someone working through something unfamiliar. The processing of a mind that moved fast and was already 3 steps ahead of the sentence it had just received. He made another call. 4 sentences in Korean, clipped and absolute, then silence. Someone will go, he said. Go and do what? Remove them. Safely. He paused. They will be taken somewhere clean. Medical attention if needed. No one will touch them. I don't know you, she said. I don't know what your word costs. I don't know what it buys. No, he said. You don't. She waited. But I know what mine costs me, he said, and I don't give it to people I intend to disappoint. She looked at the passing city. She pressed her hands harder against her thighs. The baby moved. The slow, underwater roll she had come to know over 3 months, the particular turning of a body in a small, warm space. Her hand went to her belly before she thought about it. Automatic, the gesture of a woman who had been the only protection this child had for 7 months and had made a habit, a ritual, of the reminder. In the front seat, she felt rather than saw the moment his attention shifted. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on the window. But she knew, with the precise animal awareness she had developed in 4 months of sharing spaces with people who wished her ill, that he had seen the gesture, that his eyes had gone to her hand on her belly and stayed there for a moment before returning to the road. She did not comment on it. Neither did he. The car slowed. She looked up. An underground garage. The echo of the engine bouncing off concrete columns, the fluorescent lights, the kind of infrastructure that existed beneath buildings of serious consequence. The driver pulled in smoothly, stopped. She got out. The concrete floor was cold under her bare feet. She stood in the garage and looked at the elevator bank at the far wall, and then she turned and looked at Minjun, who had come around from the passenger side and was standing at a careful distance, not hovering, not crowding. Present, available. The specific physical positioning of a man who has made a calculation about the amount of space that was currently required and was maintaining it with the same precision he seemed to apply to everything. She looked at him properly for the first time in full light. He was... She filed the assessment quickly, clinically, the way she filed physical observations during examination. Tall, lean in the way of someone whose body had been kept to its functional essentials for a long time. Dark hair, the angular, clean-boned severity of a face that had never been arranged for softness. A scar at his collarbone, visible where his top button was open. Thin, old, the faded white of an injury that had healed correctly. Dark eyes that were looking at her with the same complete attention they had offered since the warehouse. Not through her, at her. The distinction she had learned over 4 months was everything. I'm not going to run, she said. I know. I have nowhere to run to. I have no documentation. I have no phone. I have no... I know, he said, quietly. Something moved in his voice on the second saying of it. Something that was not pity. She had established that. Something older. The sound of a person acknowledging a specific wrong done to a specific person and receiving the full weight of it rather than deflecting. I know. She nodded. She turned toward the elevator. Lola. She stopped, did not turn. You are not a transaction, he said. I want you to know that. I understand it costs nothing for me to say it, and I am not asking you to believe it tonight. I'm putting it on the record. For later. She stood with her back to him. Everything costs something, she said. I'll find out what this costs in the morning. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood in the cold garage with her bare feet on the concrete and her hand on her belly, and she felt the baby move again. The push and shift, the insistent small aliveness of it. And she pressed back, gently, the way she always did, the private language between them. I know, she murmured, too low for anyone else. We're somewhere else now. The apartment was 40 floors above the city and built for a person who had decided that emptiness was its own form of power. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the entire far wall. Manhattan thrown below like a circuit board on fire. The skyline's jaw of bright teeth going all the way to the horizon. The specific, magnificent indifference of a city that contained 10 million separate emergencies and had stopped ranking them. Black furniture, clean lines, surfaces empty of the small clutter that accumulated in spaces where people actually lived. No mail on the counter, no shoes at the door, no evidence of a life between the operational exits and the operational entries. It was the apartment of a man who slept here and worked elsewhere, and did not experience the space between those two activities as a place where he was permitted to be human. She stood in the entrance and catalogued it. Which room is mine? She said. He was behind her, removing his coat. He stopped. She turned to look at him and found an expression she was starting to learn. The fractional rearrangement of a face that was not accustomed to the specific angle of a question she had just asked. Not the content of the question. The angle. The way she had asked it. Which room is mine? Not, may I use a room? Not, do you have somewhere I could sleep? The implicit assumption of ownership in it. The refusal to position herself as a guest, requiring permission. He held her gaze for a moment, but something in his expression settled. Second door in the hallway, he said. Bathroom attached, clothes in the closet. I had them brought while we drove. They may not fit precisely. More tomorrow. A pause. Both locks work, bedroom and bathroom, from the inside. She looked at him. You've mentioned the locks twice. You should be able to lock doors, he said. The complete simplicity of it. No qualification, no but, no conditional clause waiting at the end. Just the statement, but sitting there, plainly. That is not a complicated position. She turned and walked down the hallway. The room was large and quiet, and the bed was 4 times the size of the mattress she had been sleeping on. She stood in the doorway and looked at it and made herself breathe normally. She checked the lock. She went to the bathroom and ran the shower hot and stood under it with her palm flat against the tile wall and let the water run until her skin was warm from the outside in, not just the surface, until the cold of the warehouse floor and the holding facility and 4 months of institutional temperature was not gone. She was not naive enough to believe it was gone. Rinsed back, maybe. Pushed to a layer she did not have to lead with tonight. She dressed in what had been left, practical, approximately correct in size, chosen by someone who had assessed the problem efficiently rather than personally. She unlocked the door and walked back to the kitchen. He was at the stove. He had changed nothing about himself except the jacket, the white shirt, sleeves rolled, the same careful efficiency applied to cooking that he seemed to apply to everything. The smell reached her before she was fully in the room. Real food, food with depth and oil, and the specific smell of onions softened in heat. And her body responded to it at a cellular level, bypassing every form of composure she had assembled and going straight to the animal fact of hunger. She sat at the island without being told. He put a bowl in front of her without comment. Rice and stew, simple and sufficient. She picked up the spoon and she ate, and the first mouthful was warm and real, and her throat tightened, and she looked at the window and kept eating and did not examine what was happening in her chest because she did not have the resources for it right now. He sat across from her. He drank tea. He looked at the window. He did not watch her with pity. He did not ask questions with his eyes. He simply occupied his side of the island and let her occupy hers, and the silence between them was not comfortable. Comfort was not available yet, and she would not have trusted it if it were. But it was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who had agreed, without discussion, to be in the same space without demanding anything from each other. When she finished, she set down the spoon. "Tell me about the facility," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because the network running those auctions has been moving product through 3 of my operational territories for 8 months without my knowledge." He held her gaze. "Someone allowed that. I need to understand the scale of the operation before I can understand how that was possible." Operational territories. Product. The vocabulary of a man for whom this was infrastructure, not aberration, not moral failure encountered unexpectedly, but the specific mechanics of a criminal economy he moved through and against. She filed this. She filed the coldness of the vocabulary and the fact that the coldness did not seem to be indifference, seemed, if she was reading him correctly, to be the way a particular kind of rage expressed itself when it had been trained, over a long time, not to come out as anything visible. "And the 4 women," she said, "in Newark. Confirmed out as of 40 minutes ago." He looked at his tea. All 4. Medical assessment in progress. She absorbed this. The confirmation landed in her chest, and she let it land, and she did not show what it did there. "How?" "I made calls. That fast. When I give an instruction," he said, "the gap between the instruction and the outcome is not supposed to be a gap. When it is, there are consequences." He paused. Tonight, there was no gap. She studied him. She thought about the 4 women in Newark, in whatever safe space they had been moved to, in their first night of not being where they had been. She thought about what that cost and who had paid it. She thought about the specific mechanism of a man who could move that fast, with those resources, at midnight on a phone call. And what it meant that that mechanism had been deployed tonight in the direction of 4 women he had no prior reason to care about. "All right," she said. She told him. Location, layout, the underground connection between the 2 buildings, the guard rotation, the documentation room. The names she had heard. Partial, fragmentary, the incomplete intelligence of 4 months behind walls with no tools except her own memory and the habit of attention she had been born with and honed in every library she had ever sat in. She told him about the man who had transported her to the auction, the mask he wore, the instruction he gave the guards. In Korean, she said. The quality of the air in the room changed. Not dramatically. Nothing Minjin did was dramatic, but something shifted. Some stillness became more still, the way water becomes more still just before it freezes. He looked at his cup. He set it down with a care that was not about the cup. "Say that again." "The man who brought me to the auction, He spoke Korean to the guards, one sentence, short, an instruction. She watched his face. Does that mean something? It means, he said, very quietly, that someone with access to Korean-speaking personnel, or who is Korean themselves, is embedded in this network. He paused. And the network has been operating in my territory for 8 months. Another pause. Which means someone who knows my territory well enough to avoid my people for 8 months is connected to this. Someone who knows your territory, she repeated, meaning someone who knows you. His jaw tightened. 1 degree. Barely visible. Possibly, he said. Leia, probably, she said. He looked at her, and she held his gaze and did not soften the word because it did not deserve softening. Probability was probability, and she was a scientist before she was anything else, and the data pointed where the data pointed regardless of how uncomfortable the destination was. Probably, he said after a moment, conceding it, accepting the accuracy of it without argument, which she noted, which she filed. She stood. She was deeply tired, not the tired that sleep fixed, but the tired that lived in the load-bearing structures that had been accumulating since before this started, that would take more than one night of safety to begin to address. But it was the kind of tired she could manage, the familiar kind, the kind she had been managing since she was 9 years old in Lagos, figuring out what she was going to build with the materials available. I'm going to sleep, she said. Yes. She walked down the hallway. She stopped. Minjin? Yes. She did not turn around. You should know, the baby moves at night. She's been doing it for 6 weeks, every night, regular as anything. She paused. I'm not telling you for any reason. Nobody has known. There's been nobody to tell for a long time, and She stopped. The hallway was quiet. I hear you, he said. His voice had changed, just slightly. The register beneath the register, the one she had heard only once before, at the warehouse, stripped of its operational surface. Thank you for telling me. She nodded at the wall. She went to the room. She locked the door. She lay down on the enormous bed and placed her hand on her belly, and in the dark she felt the baby move, punctual and certain. And she pressed back, and the tightness in her chest that had been there since the warehouse. Since before the warehouse, since the holding facility, since the car in Brooklyn 4 months ago when she understood what was happening and had no way to stop it. Shifted. Not gone, but moved, rearranged around something new. She slept. Down the hall, a phone call began. Low Korean, the voice of a man with resources directing them, quietly and completely, toward the specific problem of 8 months of violations in his territory, and a Korean speaker who had helped facilitate them. The investigation that call began would within 72 hours arrive at a name. The name would arrive the way all catastrophic information arrived. Not announced, not dramatic, but quiet and total, and reshaping everything it touched. 3 weeks had passed, and she had started to understand the architecture of him. Not who he was. She was not naive enough to believe 3 weeks in a well-locked apartment with good food and consistent distance was sufficient data for that conclusion. But the architecture, the load-bearing structures, the things that held the rest of it up. He was precise, not careful. There was a difference. Careful implied the possibility of carelessness being corrected. Precise implied that the option of carelessness had been eliminated at a structural level. He was precise about time, about language, about the specific temperature of every interaction. Gauging, always, what was required and delivering exactly that, and not the fraction beyond it, that would have become something else. He knocked before entering any room she occupied. Always. 3 knocks, pause, enter only on her response. She had timed it on the 3rd day. She had stopped timing it by the 2nd week because the consistency made the timing unnecessary. He left food on the counter when he left in the morning. Not prepared. Ingredients. As though the preparation was hers and the provision was his, and this was the division of the arrangement they had never discussed. She cooked. She was a good cook, had learned it from her mother in the Lagos kitchen, had maintained the skill through 8 years of student housing in Ibadan and Seoul and New York as the one reliable form of daily pleasure, available on a fellowship stipend. She cooked, and he ate what she made and said, every time, one sentence, a specific observation, never generic. The spice level or the texture of this is different from last time, or once, looking at the bowl for a moment before he picked up his fork. My mother made something like this. And then he ate, and they were quiet, and the quiet had changed over 3 weeks from the quiet of 2 strangers avoiding language to the quiet of 2 people who had found, without negotiating it, a shared tolerance for silence. It unsettled her that it was comfortable, that she had allowed it to become comfortable. She was sitting at the kitchen island on a Tuesday 3 weeks in, working through the obstetrics textbook that had appeared on the counter 8 days ago. No note, no explanation, no yawn saying the boss wanted you to have this. Simply present one morning between her coffee cup and the window. She had picked it up and opened it and not said anything about it, because saying something about it would have required deciding how to receive it, and she was not yet ready to make that decision. She heard 3 knocks at the kitchen entrance. Yes, she said. Minjun came in, dressed for outside, the dark coat, the assembled quality of a man whose appearance had been calibrated to a specific standard and maintained there with the same consistency he applied to everything. He stopped at the island, looked at the textbook, looked at her. Jan has the documentation, he said. She set down her pencil. My documentation? Passport, a student visa replacement. He's working through the NYU fellowship reinstatement. There's a process. It will take some weeks, but the obstruction is administrative, not legal. It's solvable. She looked at him. Why? He looked back at her with the expression that had appeared twice before, the one that found the question either obvious or unanswerable and could not decide which. Because it belongs to you, he said. Because someone took it. Because the taking was wrong, and the correction is within my capacity. He paused. I don't need more reason than that. She looked at the textbook. She thought about the residency application that was a year behind. The fellowship program with the reinstatement clause she had found in the documentation packet in year 1 and memorized because she memorized everything and because some part of her had known, always, that she was building on ground that could shift. She thought about what it meant that a man she had known for 3 weeks had set a mechanism in motion to return the pieces of her life that had been removed. She thought about trusting that, about what it would cost. There's something I need to tell you, she said. He waited. He was very good at waiting. The specific stillness of a person who had learned that the quality of their silence determined what people brought into it. She had noticed this in the first week, and it had made her more careful, not less, because a man who knew how to be silent in a way that invited truth was a man with a particular kind of power. In Seoul, she said, 8 months ago. She pressed her hands flat against the counter. Ballast, the old habit. I was at a private event. I was covering a catering shift for a friend. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had no invitation, no clearance. I was carrying trays and trying not to be noticed. She paused. A man became ill during the event. I was the only person in the room who understood what was happening. What was happening? Poisoning. Not dramatic. Slow, targeted, something in the drink. Something that presented as cardiac at first, but the progression was wrong. She looked at the counter. I recognized it because I had spent 3 weeks on a toxicology unit in Ibadan, where we had 2 cases of similar presentation. I knew the counter agent. I had materials in my bag. I always carry a basic kit. Old habit, my mother was a nurse. She paused. I worked on him for 4 hours in a side room while his people stood outside the door. By morning, his vitals had stabilized. I fell asleep in the chair. And the man? Gone when I woke. His people too. No note. The room was empty, except for a blanket someone had put over me while I slept. She looked up. I photographed the room before I left. Every event I attended, every clinical environment, I photographed everything. Documentation habit from first year? She held his gaze. The photos were on my phone. My phone was taken when I was trafficked. Minjin was very still. But the photos still exist, she said. Cloud backup, automatic. If the account is intact, and I have no reason to think it isn't, everything I photographed that night is sitting in a server somewhere with a timestamp and a geolocation. The event name, he said. She told him. What happened to his face in the 3 seconds that followed was the most information she had received from it in 3 weeks. Not a collapse. Nothing in his face collapsed, but a rearrangement. A subtle, total rearrangement of every element, the way a landscape rearranges when you understand that the thing you were looking at was not the horizon, but a wall. You know it, she said. I know it. His voice was very quiet. That event was not a private gathering. It was a meeting, specifically convened, specifically invited, the financial principles of the network that took you. The host was their primary capital partner. He looked at her. The man who was poisoned. She waited. Was the host, he said, the primary partner, the man the network exists to protect and profit. The cold moved through her, not the cold of the warehouse floor, the cold of understanding arriving fully formed. He survived, she said, because of you, because of me. She pressed her hands harder against the counter. And he had me trafficked. Someone did. His voice had dropped to the register she had learned to pay most attention to. The one that was not a threat, but the flat promise of a man who had already made a decision and was simply acquiring the remaining information. You were not processed through normal intake. No number, no manifest listing. You were placed. His eyes held hers. Specifically, deliberately. Someone knew you were at that event and knew what you had photographed and decided that the simplest solution was to make you disappear. And the baby, she said. The word sat between them. She had not said it directly to him before, had referred to it as she, as the baby, in the oblique grammar of avoidance. She said it now with the flatness of a woman delivering a clinical fact. And the baby, he said, would disappear with me. Yes. She nodded slowly. Then she was doing the calculation. The same calculation she had been doing for 3 weeks. The one that arrived at the same answer every time, and that she had been refusing to present to herself fully because the answer required something she was not yet prepared to give. The answer required her to tell him something. The thing she had been carrying since the warehouse, since the first time she heard his voice in that warehouse, and her body had responded before her mind finished its sentence. She was not ready. Not yet. The documentation was not in place. She did not know the full shape of the danger. She did not know who inside his world had ordered her disappearance. And until she knew that, until she understood whether she was safe or whether the danger had simply changed addresses, she could not. "The account," she said. "I can access it from any device. The photographs are there. I'll have a device here within the hour. When I access it, when you see what's in those photographs." She held his gaze. "You need to be prepared for the possibility that the person who ordered my trafficking is not external to you. Not the network, not the auction house." She paused. "Close." He looked at her. "How close?" he said. She thought about the holding facility, the Korean voice through the wall, the single sentence of instruction, clipped and certain, the cadence of it, not the Korean of someone who had learned it as a second language, not the careful syllables of someone translating in real time. Native, fluent, the Korean of someone for whom it was the first language of authority and command. And the other thing, the thing she had not said yet, the thing she was still deciding whether to say, still turning over in the private space of herself, and still testing against the architecture of what she knew, and what she suspected, and what she was not yet ready to confirm. "Close enough," she said, "that you are going to need someone beside you when you find out. Someone you trust completely." He looked at her for a long moment. The dark eyes, the careful face, the particular quality of his attention that had been one of the constants of these 3 weeks. Total, undeflected, stood the attention of a man who had decided that whatever she said was worth receiving without distortion. "I'll call Yeon," he said. "Good." She pushed back from the counter. "Get me the device. And Minjun?" "Yes, when the photographs come up." She paused at the kitchen doorway, her hand on the frame, the warm light of the room behind her and the dim hallway ahead. "There will be faces you recognize. There will be faces that will require you to make decisions you are not prepared for." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I need you to be the version of yourself that thinks before it acts. Not the other version." Something moved in his expression. The faintest trace of something that was not quite a smile and not quite its opposite. A recognition, an acknowledgement of the thing she had just told him about himself, and the fact that she had read it accurately enough to name it. "I'll try," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I told you." She went to the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she pressed both hands to her belly, and she felt the baby move. The evening shift, the reliable, punctual aliveness of it, and she sat with the weight of what she had not yet said. She had been at that event in Seoul. She had saved a man's life. She had photographed the room. The photographs were evidence. The evidence was the reason she had been trafficked. All of that was true. And there was one more thing that was true. The thing she had known since the warehouse and had been carrying in the locked room of herself, turning over in the dark of 3 weeks of proximity, testing against what she knew, against what her body had understood before her mind caught up. The man she had saved that night in Seoul. She had never seen his face clearly. She had worked by emergency light, focused on the symptoms, the pulse, the mechanics of keeping someone alive. She had not looked at him as a person. She had looked at him as a patient. But she had heard his voice, delirious, drifting in and out, speaking Korean she could not understand except for 2 words that were the same in enough languages that she caught them. "Thank you," spoken at 3 in the morning to a woman he could not fully see, with the raw, unstripped gratitude of a man who understood that he was alive because of her, and was not yet conscious enough to perform anything other than the truth. Thank you. She had heard that voice again, 3 weeks ago, in a warehouse in Queens. The voice that had said, 50 million. The voice that had said, because I could not sit there anymore. The voice of Kang Minjun. She pressed her hands against her belly. The baby moved. I know, she said in the dark, in the locked room, at 40 floors above the city that had taken her and given her back something it had not been trying to give. I know. I'm figuring it out. Outside the room, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. 3 knocks. The device is here, he said through the door. 1 minute, she said. She sat in the dark for exactly 1 minute. She breathed. She arranged what she knew and what she was not yet ready to say, and what the photographs were about to show him, and what would happen when they did. She arranged it all carefully, the way she arranged everything, into structure, into sequence, into the shape of something that could be managed. Then she stood. She unlocked the door. She walked out to face the man who had saved her without knowing he was saving the mother of his child. The photographs loaded slowly, not because the connection was bad. The device Yeon had brought was fast and clean, and the Wi-Fi in the apartment had the particular reliability of infrastructure that had never once been allowed to be anything less. They loaded slowly because there were 412 of them, backed up automatically from the night of the event in Seoul. Time-stamped, geolocated, arranged in the order she had taken them without knowing why. She sat at the kitchen island. Minjun sat across from her. Yeon stood at the counter to her left with a cup of tea he had not drunk since it was poured. The device was between her and Minjun, screen facing up, the gallery loading image by image with the quiet patience of a machine that had been waiting 8 months to be opened. She had told Yeon the summary on his way in. The event, the poisoning, the photographs, the cloud account. She had told him in 4 sentences because 4 sentences was what the situation required, and Yeon was a man who received 4 sentences and extrapolated the rest with the accuracy of someone who had been doing exactly that for 11 years. He had listened. He had looked at Minjun. Something had passed between them. The quick, total communication of 2 people who had known each other long enough to have a language below language. Then, Yeon had set down his tea and said, very carefully, "Show us." The gallery finished loading. 412 photographs. The first 340 were what she had told them. The room, the layout, the faces of the guests, the particular clarity of images taken by a medical student who documented environments by instinct, who had photographed the floral arrangements and the bar setup, and the sightlines from every corner, because she had walked in knowing she should not be there, and her anxiety had expressed itself, as it always did, through the compulsive capturing of detail. And then the photographs from the side room. She had not thought about these. She had told him about the event, the poisoning, the photographs of the room. She had not thought, had genuinely not processed, in 4 months of captivity and 3 weeks of careful reconstruction, that she had kept photographing, that she had taken the camera out in the side room while she worked, not of the patient, never of the patient, of the materials she was using, the progression of symptoms, the counteragent ratios, clinical documentation, automatic. The habit so deeply ingrained that even in an emergency, even working with her hands and her training and everything she had, some part of her had been reaching for the record. She had photographed the materials on the side table, the empty glass that had been on the main table when the symptoms began. She had brought it with her. standard toxicology protocol, preserve potential evidence. The glass was in the photographs. And in one photograph, taken at an angle she had not planned, the camera catching more than she intended when her hand moved past it, reaching for something in her bag. The doorway. The doorway to the side room. And in the doorway, visible for exactly the fraction of a second she had been pointing the lens in that direction. A face. Not the patient, not the man she had been working on. Someone else. Someone standing in the doorway, looking in. Not at her, at the man on the improvised bed, with an expression she had not seen at the time, because her back had been turned. An expression she was seeing now for the first time on a screen in a Manhattan apartment 8 months later. The expression of someone checking, not with concern, not with the expression of a person watching someone they cared about fight for their life, with the expression of a person assessing whether the work was finished. The Minjun looked at the photograph. The kitchen went very quiet. Not the ordinary quiet. The quiet of a room in which something has just been confirmed that was already suspected, and the confirmation is worse than the suspicion, because suspicion leaves room for error, and confirmation does not. "Who is that?" she said. She already knew from his face that he knew. She asked because the naming of it had to come from him. She was not going to name it for him. Jan set down his tea. He turned away from the counter and he looked at the photograph and his easy face. The face she had come to understand was his professional surface, the one he maintained because it was useful. Went very still in a way she had only seen it go still once before, in the kitchen 3 weeks ago, when she first mentioned the Korean speaker. Minjun said nothing for a long moment. Then, "My brother." 2 words. Flat. The flatness of a man who has been applying pressure to a specific point for 3 weeks and has just felt it give way. And the giving way is not relief. The giving way is the beginning of something that makes relief impossible. "Kang Ji-hoon," Jan said, quietly, almost to himself. "He was in Seoul 8 months ago. I pulled the travel records 2 weeks ago when we started running the Korean speaker. He told you he was in Osaka." "He told me he was in Osaka," Minjun said. "He was in Seoul." Jan looked at the photograph on the screen. He was at the event. He was in the doorway of that room. A pause. He was checking whether the poison had worked. The word poison sat in the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples moving outward from it, touching everything. The event, the network, the 8 months of operation in Minjun's territory, the Korean speaker at the facility, the specific targeting of Lola. She watched Minjun's face. She had been watching it for 3 weeks, learning its vocabulary. What was happening in it now was not the rearrangement she had seen when the photograph loaded. This was deeper. This was structural. The face of a man who had just discovered that the danger was not adjacent to him, not connected to him through several degrees of operational separation, but seated at his table, sleeping under his family's name, using his territory, his networks, his trust as the infrastructure for a thing that had put a pregnant woman in a warehouse in Queens. "Why?" she said. She was not asking about the network. She was asking the narrower question, the one that had been sitting in her chest for 3 weeks, the one she had been approaching and retreating from, the one that required him to answer because she did not yet have enough of the picture. Minjun looked at her. "My brother is older," he said, "by 8 years. When our father died, the syndicate should have passed to him. It has always passed to the eldest. He paused. The pausing of a man choosing precision over speed. It did not pass to him. Our father made a different arrangement in his final year. He saw something in Jehoon that made him choose differently. Another pause. Jehoon has never accepted the arrangement. He has been building something parallel for years. His own network, his own capital, his own operation that existed inside the structure of mine without my knowledge. The auction network, she said. Yes, he was using your territory as cover. Yes, and the event in Seoul. She pressed her hands to the counter. The man who was being poisoned, the host, the primary capital partner, Jehoon was trying to remove him. To take the network's primary partnership for himself, Jan said, from the counter. His voice was very careful. If the host died, the network needed new capital leadership. Jehoon was positioned to step in. And I stopped it, she said. The kitchen was silent. And you stopped it, Minjin said. She looked at the photograph on the screen. The face in the doorway. She could see it clearly now. The face she had not seen that night because her back was turned. The face of a man who had been standing in a doorway, watching whether the person he had poisoned was going to die, and finding instead a 23-year-old Nigerian woman with a medical kit and a habit of documenting everything, doing the one thing he could not have predicted, saving the target. He would have known who I was immediately, she said. I signed the catering manifest. My name, my details. It would have taken him hours to find out who I was and what I was doing there. She paused. And when he found out I was a medical student with photographs of the room and the glass and the side table, he understood what you had, Minjin said, without knowing you had it. I didn't know I had it, she said. I didn't know what any of it meant. I thought it was nothing. I thought I was nobody. You were never nobody, he said, and then stopped. The abruptness of the stop, the sense of a sentence cut before it reached where it was going, sat in the air between them for a moment. He looked at the screen. He looked at his brother's face in the doorway. He had you trafficked to silence the photographs and remove a witness. And the baby? She said. And the baby, he said. She watched his hands on the counter. Both of them, flat on the marble, and the effort of keeping them flat was visible in the way it had been visible in the warehouse. Tendons, jaw, the specific physical signature of a man converting something that wanted to be violent into something that was simply still. Minjun? Jan said. I know. He's coming to dinner on Friday. I know. He does not know that we... I know, Jan. He looked up. His eyes moved to her. He doesn't know you're here. The apartment is off book. He doesn't know what we've found. He held her gaze. You are safe here. Whatever happens next, you are safe in this building. She looked at him. She thought about what she knew, the full shape of it, the thing she had been carrying in the locked room of herself for 3 weeks, the thing that connected every dot. His voice in the warehouse, the night in Seoul, the baby that was moving under her hand right now. She thought about whether to tell him. Not yet. Not because she did not trust him. The evidence of 3 weeks was pointing, with the reliability of accumulated data, toward a man who had said he would do things and had done them, who had said she was safe and had made her safe, who had sat across a kitchen island from her every evening for 21 days and asked nothing except the truth when she was ready to give it. Not yet, because the truth, when she gave it, would change the equation of everything. His motivation, his decisions, his relationship to her, and to the danger, and to the choices that were coming. And she needed him to make the choices that were coming from a place of clarity, not from the place a man stood when he had just found out that the woman he had been protecting for 3 weeks was carrying his child. She needed him to be the version that thought first. She would tell him, after Friday. "All right," she said. "What happens on Friday?" He looked at her. "On Friday," he said, "I have dinner with my brother, and I do not show him any of this." A pause. "And you stay in this apartment, and you do not open the door for anyone except Yeon. And after dinner, I start pulling everything he has built inside my operation. Every thread, every account, every contact. I pull it all." His voice was absolutely level. "And when I have it all, when there is nothing left that he can use and nowhere left that he can go, then we finish it." "Legally," she said. He looked at her. "I have photographs that put him at a poisoning," she said. "I have evidence of trafficking operations, of financial crimes, of 8 months of criminal activity conducted under the cover of your organization. That is not nothing." She held his gaze. "There is a way to do this that ends with him in a cell instead of the other option. The other option is faster. The other option is permanent in a way that cannot be corrected if any part of our picture is incomplete." She paused. "And there are 4 women in a hospital in New Jersey right now who deserve to see the inside of a courtroom." She paused again. "So do I." The kitchen was very quiet. Yeon was looking at the counter. Minjin looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 3 weeks, with the complete, undeflected attention of a man who had decided, without announcement, that whatever she said was worth receiving without distortion. "Legally," he said. "Yes." "All right." She nodded. She looked at the photograph on the screen. Jahoon's face in the doorway, 8 months ago in Seoul, Yen checking whether his brother's competition was dead. She closed the gallery. Friday arrived with the particular quality of days that have been marked in advance. Heavier than ordinary days, the air around them slightly changed, the way the atmosphere changes before weather that has been forecast. She spent it in the apartment. She read. She cooked. She felt the baby move at 11 in the morning, and at 3 in the afternoon, and at 7 in the evening. Each movement, the same reminder. The insistent, patient aliveness of someone who had decided, from the very beginning, to keep going regardless of the conditions outside. She pressed back each time. The private conversation, the only one she had been able to have honestly for longer than she could measure. She thought about Seoul. She had been doing this more, returning to that night with more of the picture now, filling in what she had not known at the time with what she knew now, the way you returned to an old photograph and saw things in it that had always been there but required context to become visible. She had been in the side room for 4 hours. She had worked on a man she could not see clearly, whose name she did not know, who spoke in the delirium of someone moving in and out of consciousness. Fragments of Korean, 1 sentence in English. The blanket placed over her sleeping form before dawn. She had been thinking about the blanket. It was a specific detail, meant the kind she could not stop returning to. In the hours between the stabilization of his vitals and the moment she fell asleep in the chair, there had been a period. She estimated 30 minutes from the progression of events, when she had been asleep and he had been awake. When he had been alert enough to assess the room, to understand what had happened, to see her in the chair with her kit open on her lap and her head against the wall. And he had covered her, while he had been poisoned and half-conscious and in the process of recovering from something that should have killed him. And he had found a blanket, and covered the woman who had saved his life before he left. She did not know what to do with that. She had been not knowing what to do with it for 8 months. It was the detail that had made her, in the 3 days between Seoul and her departure for New York, turn the night over and over, looking for something she could not name. The feeling of having been in a room with someone and missed them, somehow, despite the 4 hours of proximity. She pressed her hands flat on the textbook. She was not going to do this tonight. Tonight required clarity. Tonight, Minjun was having dinner with the man who had tried to have her erased, and she was going to sit in this apartment and be ready for whatever happened after. At 8:47, her phone, the new one, the one Yeon had set up on the second week, lit up with a message from Yeon. In position. Building is covered. Do not open the door. She read it, set the phone down. At 9:13, it lit up again. He knows you're here. She read that one twice. Then she stood up. She was in the kitchen, standing at the island, when she heard the elevator. Not the main elevator. The service elevator. The one at the back of the building that accessed the apartment through the staff entrance. She had identified it on day 4. She had noted that the staff entrance had a separate lock from the main door and that the code for it was different and that she did not have it. She stood at the island and she listened to the elevator rise. She picked up her phone. Typed to Yeon. Service elevator. His response came in 4 seconds. I see it. Do not move. Stay in the kitchen. She stayed in the kitchen. The elevator stopped at this floor. She counted the seconds. The time between the elevator stopping and a door opening was approximately 8 seconds in her experience of the building's layout. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The service entrance opened. He was not what she had expected. She had built a picture of Jihoon from the photograph. The face in the doorway, the expression she had described to herself as assessing. She had extrapolated from that. Cold, certain. The specific arrogance of a man who had been making large decisions from behind the cover of other people's structures for years. He was all of that. He was also, she registered immediately, frightened. Not obviously. Not in the way that showed easily. But she was a medical student. She read bodies the way other people read text. The elevated heart rate visible in the pulse at his throat, and the micro tension in the jaw that was not the settled tension of a dangerous man in control, but the rigid tension of a man who had just discovered that the ground he was standing on was less solid than he believed. He was frightened, and the fear had expressed itself as action. As coming here, tonight, to look at the thing he had been told existed and assess the damage. He stood in the service entrance and looked at her. She stood at the island and looked back. So, he said. His English was accented, precise, the English of a man who had learned it as a tool and wielded it as such. You are the one. I am Lola Adeyemi, she said. Who are you? Something moved in his expression. He had not expected the question. He had expected fear. She understood. The fear of a woman who knew what he was and what he had done and was alone in an apartment with him. The flat, direct question was not the response he had modeled. You know who I am, he said. I know your name, she said. Kang Ji-hoon. Minjun's older brother. The man who was standing in a doorway in Seoul 8 months ago, checking whether the man you poisoned was dead. She kept her voice level. I know what you did. I know what you tried to do to me. I know about the network and the territory and the 8 months of operation you built inside your brother's organization. She paused. I know all of it. The question is whether you know what I have. His jaw tightened. A cloud account, she said. 412 photographs. Time-stamped. Geolocated. Including one very clear image of your face in a doorway, and the glass that contained the compound you used, and the clinical record of every counteragent I administered, and in what quantities, which is also documentation of the poisoning itself. She held his gaze. That account is not on this device. It is not in this apartment. It is accessible from any device in the world with the login credentials, which exist only here. She touched her temple. If anything happens to me, the account becomes inaccessible. The evidence disappears. But if nothing happens to me, you would use it, he said. I would use it, she said. Yes, my brother will not let you. Your brother, she said, is not the reason I am telling you this. He went still. The fear in his throat, the pulse she had been tracking, elevated. She saw him process, saw the calculation running, the same calculation she had been running for weeks, the assessment of available moves and their consequences. What do you want? He said. I want you to understand, she said, that the woman you put in a warehouse in Queens is still here, that she documented everything, that the documentation is safe, and the documentation is sufficient, and that the only question left is whether you walk out of this building tonight and do what is inevitable quietly, or whether you make it loud. You are threatening me. I am informing you, she said. There is a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes dropped to her belly. The swell of it, the 7 months of evidence that had been the secondary reason she was put in that warehouse, the proof that she had been specifically targeted for 2 reasons and not 1. His expression when he looked at her belly was the most honest thing she had seen on his face. It was not cruelty. It was not the smug superiority she had prepared herself for. So it was something smaller and more complicated, the expression of a man who had made decisions that he had translated into logistics and numbers and operational problems, and was now standing 3 feet away from the specific human consequences of those decisions, and finding that the translation back was harder than he had expected. The baby, he said, is mine, she said. Flat, absolute, and is not your concern. He looked at her for another long moment. Then, from the hallway behind her, the main door opened. Minjin walked in. He looked at his brother standing at the service entrance. He looked at Lola standing at the island. He looked at the 3 feet of space between them and the specific quality of the air in the kitchen, and he assessed it all in the space of 2 seconds, with the complete accuracy of a man who had spent his life reading rooms. He walked to the island, and he stood beside her, not in front of her, not between her and his brother in the gesture of a man placing himself as a shield, beside her, the specific positioning of someone who had decided, in the 2 seconds of his assessment, that this was where he stood. Jehoon, he said. His brother looked at him. The fear had rearranged itself into something more controlled now that the configuration of the room had changed. Brother. You came here tonight, Minjin said, because someone at dinner told you something they shouldn't have. Which means I need to have a conversation with someone on my staff. He paused. But that is not the conversation we are having right now. Minjun. You were in Seoul, Minjun said. You told me Osaka. You were in Seoul, at an event run by the network you have been operating inside my territory for 8 months. You were standing in a doorway, checking whether the man you poisoned was going to die. He paused. And when he didn't die, because of her, You spent 3 months locating her and had her trafficked to an auction house in Queens. Jihoon said nothing. She was pregnant, Minjin said. His voice did not change. It was the steadiness of the sea before a storm. Not calm, but the total surface stillness of something with enormous depth beneath it. She was 7 months pregnant, and you put her in a warehouse, and you sold her to a room full of people who would not spend $500 on her. You don't understand what the stakes. I understand exactly what the stakes were, Minjin said. The stakes were your position, your network, your arrangement with a capital partner you were trying to remove so you could take his place. He looked at his brother. I understand the stakes. I have understood them since Wednesday, when I looked at a photograph and saw your face in a doorway in Seoul. He paused. The thing I am asking myself right now is whether the man I grew up with, the man I have been protecting the interests of for 15 years inside this organization because he is my brother and because that is what we do, whether that man is still in there somewhere or whether he has been gone long enough that I did not notice him leaving. Jihoon looked at him. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. She did not think Jihoon was capable of guilt in the way the word was usually meant, but something adjacent. The look of a man who has built something over a long time and is only now standing in the room with the full inventory of what he built, seeing it clearly. I made decisions, Jihoon said. You were given what should have been mine. I made decisions in response to that. Yes, Minjin said. You did. He looked at his brother for a long moment. And now, I am making mine. Jihoon left the apartment at 10:19. But he left because Minjin told him to leave, and because the alternative, the other version of this conversation, the one that did not end with a man walking out through a service entrance and into the night, had been visibly available in the room, and Jihoon was intelligent enough to understand which version he had been given and what it had cost to receive it. Yeon was waiting in the hallway. She heard the brief exchange in Korean through the door. Clipped, functional, the logistics of what happened next, being arranged with the efficiency of 2 people who had done this before. Then the elevator. Then silence. She stood at the kitchen island. She had been standing at the island for the 23 minutes since Minjin walked in and stood beside her, and she had not moved because her legs were doing something she did not have patience for right now. The fine, an uncontrollable tremor that arrived when adrenaline had been burning long enough that the body finally sent the invoice. She gripped the edge of the counter, and she breathed, and she waited for the tremor to finish its business. Minjin came back to the kitchen. He stopped at the island. She did not look at him. She looked at the counter, at her hands gripping the edge of it, the knuckles, the bruises on her wrists that were almost healed now, yellow at the very edges, nearly gone. You knew he was going to come here, she said. I suspected, he said. Someone at dinner mentioned your name. I should have controlled the dinner better than I did. A pause. I am sorry. She looked up. Apology from Minjin was... She had not encountered it before. Not in 3 weeks. Not because he had done nothing worth apologizing for, but because the word did not seem to live in the vocabulary he typically deployed. It sat in the kitchen now with the slight awkwardness of a word placed in a sentence where it did not usually go. I handled it, she said. I know. He looked at her. I know you did. That is not... He stopped, started again. That is not something you should have had to handle. Not alone. Not in my apartment, in a situation that exists because of decisions made in my family. She released the edge of the counter. She straightened. The tremor was mostly gone. Not entirely, but reduced to the level she could manage without the counter's assistance. "What happens to him?" she said. "He is removed from every position within the organization tonight. The accounts he controls are frozen. The network he built inside my territory is dismantled by the end of the week." Minjin paused. "And the evidence you have, the photographs, the documentation, goes to the federal task force that has been building a case on the auction network for 14 months. You know about the task force. I made contact with them 2 days ago." She stared at him. 2 days ago, when Yeon confirmed Jihoon's travel records from Seoul. He held her gaze. "I told you I would do this legally. I do not say things I do not mean." She thought about the 2 days. 48 hours during which he had confirmed his brother's involvement, made contact with federal investigators, constructed the architecture of a legal case, and sat across from her at the kitchen island every evening eating food she cooked without showing any of it. The precision of that, the specific controlled discipline of a man who had separated what needed to be done from what was happening in his chest and done the necessary thing first. "The women," she said. "The task force has their testimony. 4 witnesses, documented and protected. Combined with the photographs, the financial records Yeon has been pulling for 2 weeks, and Jihoon's travel records." He paused. "It is a sufficient case. The prosecutor I spoke to used the word overwhelming." She nodded. She absorbed this. She filed it the way she filed everything, into the structure, into the picture that was becoming more complete with every passing day. "And Jihoon," she said. "He goes to trial. He goes to trial." She looked at him. "That is not the natural outcome for a man in your position dealing with a man in his position." "No," he said. "It is not." "Why?" He held her gaze, and she saw it again. The thing she had been seeing in pieces since the warehouse, the thing she had been building a picture of with the same attention she applied to everything, the thing that was becoming harder to file under reserved, pending, because it had been accumulating for 3 weeks, and the weight of it was no longer something she could pretend was not there. "Because you asked me to," he said. "And because you were right. And because there are 4 women who deserve to see the inside of a courtroom, and you deserve to see him held accountable in the full light of what he did, not in the dark, not quietly, not in a way that can be explained away or forgotten." He paused. "Because visible accountability is the only kind that means anything. And because—" He stopped. She waited. "Because," he said more quietly, "I am trying to be something other than the version of myself that acts before it thinks. And you are the only person who has ever told me directly that both versions exist. And I find that I am—" He stopped again, looked at the window. The city below, the 10,000 lights. "I find that I do not want to be the other version in front of you." The kitchen was very still. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had paid $50 million because he could not sit there anymore, who had covered her with a blanket in Seoul at 3 a.m. before he left, and she had never known his name, who had knocked 3 times before entering every room for 21 days and put obstetrics textbooks on counters without notes, and told her she was not a transaction, and sat at this island every evening eating food she cooked, and said one specific true thing about every meal and nothing about the things that were building between them. She looked at him, and she looked at her hand on her belly, and she made a decision. "Minjun," she said, "I need to tell you something." He turned from the window. "I need you to sit down," she said. "And I need you to be the version that thinks first. Before you say anything, before you react, I need you to just listen." He looked at her for a moment. He pulled out the stool, and he sat. She took a breath. 8 months ago in Seoul, she said. The man I saved. I told you I didn't see his face clearly. I told you I worked by emergency light and I was focused on the symptoms and I didn't look at him as a person. She paused. That is true. I never saw his face. He was looking at her. But I heard his voice, she said. He spoke twice in the 4 hours I worked on him. Once in Korean, which I did not understand, and once in English at 3 in the morning, when his vitals had stabilized and he was drifting between consciousness and sleep. She held his gaze. He said thank you, in English, to a woman he couldn't fully see in a dark room who had just kept him alive. The kitchen was absolutely silent. I heard that voice again 3 weeks ago, she said, in a warehouse in Queens. The voice that said, 50 million. She stopped, started again. It is the same voice, Minjun. I have been certain of it since the warehouse, and I have been carrying it alone since then, because I did not know how to, because I needed to understand the danger first. I needed to know if you were safe. I needed... She stopped. He was looking at her. His face had done the thing it did. The rearrangement, the landscape shifting, the wall becoming visible for what it was, but deeper than any of the previous times. This was not the rearrangement of new information arriving. This was the rearrangement of a man understanding that the full shape of something he was already inside of was entirely different from what he had thought. The night in Seoul, he said. His voice was very quiet. You were there. I was the woman in the side room. You saved my life. Yes. He looked at her. He looked at the swell of her belly. She watched the calculation, the same one she had been running for 8 months, run across his face in real time, the timeline, the math, the specific arithmetic of 8 months and 7 months and a night in Seoul that had been the only night in his life he could not fully account for. The baby, he said. She held his gaze and did not look away and did not speak because he was getting there and he needed to get there himself and the word needed to come from him. The baby is mine, he said. Not a question. She felt her throat tighten. She pressed her hands flat against her belly. Both of them. The full press of both palms against the warmth of it. The solid living weight of 7 months. Yes, she said. The kitchen was silent for a long moment. Then Minjun, who did not sit on floors, who did not show the room what was happening inside him, who had built his entire life on the principle that the interior was not available for general viewing, put both hands over his face. Not breaking, not collapsing, something else. The gesture of a man receiving something so large that the body needed a moment of darkness in which to hold it. She watched his shoulders, the rise and fall of his breathing, the stillness, and then the deeper stillness that came after. He took his hands from his face. He looked at her. His eyes were... She had no word for what they were. She had been building a vocabulary for this face for 3 weeks, and she did not have a word for this. It was not the cold. It was not the control. It was not the operational precision, or the calculated stillness, or any of the versions of him she had been cataloging. It was something she had not seen before. Something that lived under all of it. Something that had apparently been waiting, for a very long time, for a reason to come to the surface. You have been carrying this, he said, alone, for 3 weeks. Yes, while you were here, while we, yes. He looked at the counter. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him thinking, not the fast operational thinking she had learned to recognize, but something slower and more fundamental. The thinking of a person rearranging something from the ground up. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. Earlier, not as an accusation. He looked up. "I want to understand." "Because," she said, "the moment I told you, your motivation changed. Everything you were doing, the documentation, the women, the case against Jihoon, I needed those things to happen because they were right, not because you had a personal stake in me." She held his gaze. "I needed to know that you were the version that thought first. I needed to see it, not just hear it." She paused. "And I needed to know that what was building here—" She stopped. "What was building here," he said. She looked at the counter. "Was real," she said, "and not just because of the baby." The kitchen was very quiet. He stood up from the stool. He was careful about it, deliberate, the way he was deliberate about everything. He came around the island, and he stopped in front of her, and he was close. The 3 feet she had maintained since the warehouse, the careful preserved distance of 2 people managing something they were not yet ready to mishandle, was gone. He was close enough that she could see the scar at his collarbone, close enough to smell cedar and something clean. He did not touch her. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for 3 weeks. Completely, without deflection, with the full weight of his attention. And in his eyes, she saw the thing she had been building toward, and not naming and refusing to hand meaning to. "It is real," he said. "What is building here?" He held her gaze. "I want you to know that, regardless of everything else. Before you knew, and before I knew, and before all of it. The thing that is happening here is real." She looked at him. She looked at the man who had covered her with a blanket and soul, and not left a name. Who had bid $50 million in a warehouse because he could not sit there anymore. Who had knocked 3 times before every door for 21 days, and asked for the truth only when she was ready to give it. Her chin did not tremble. She had not let her chin tremble in 4 months. But something in her chest moved. Something deep and load-bearing. Something that had been holding a position for a very long time, and was now, carefully, beginning to consider releasing it. "I know," she said. His hand moved, slowly. He reached out, and he placed his palm against the side of her face. Warm, steady, the palm of a man who understood that the gesture required care and was applying care and nothing else. His thumb did not move. He just held the warmth there against her cheek and looked at her. And the baby moved. A slow, certain roll. The evening shift. On schedule, as always. The insistent, punctual, unambiguous presence of a third person in the room who had been making her position known since before any of this started. She watched his eyes. She watched him feel it. The movement, transmitted through the warmth of his palm against her face. The slight shift of her weight. The breath she drew. She watched him understand what it was. Something broke open in his expression. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way light broke open. Quietly, completely, changing everything it touched without effort. He stood with his hand against her face and his eyes closed for 3 seconds. Then he opened them. "Hello," he said, very quietly. Not to her, to the baby. And Lola Adeyemi, who had not cried since the holding facility in week 3. Snow, who had decided that the energy spent on tears was energy the baby needed more. Who had been carrying this alone through warehouses and zip ties and 4 months of systematic erasure and 3 weeks of proximity to the man who did not know. felt something give way in her chest. Not a collapse, not a break. The opening of something that had been closed too long. A door she had not known she had been keeping shut, swinging open on its own. The way doors swung open when the weight on the other side finally became greater than the mechanism holding them. She pressed her hand over his hand on her face, and she let it be open. The federal case moved the way federal cases moved when the evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecutor was experienced, and the defendant had been careful for so long that carelessness had become the one thing he had not prepared for. Fast. Quietly at first. Then all at once. Jan handled the handoff. The photographs, the financial records, the travel documentation, the testimony of 4 women who had spent their first week of freedom in a hospital in New Jersey, and their second week speaking to investigators with the particular clarity of people who have been invisible for long enough that visibility had become the most powerful thing they owned. He handled it with the same efficiency he applied to everything, and when he came back to the apartment on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Jehoon had walked out of the service entrance, he sat down at the kitchen island and drank his tea and said, "They have enough. Arrest warrant is being prepared." Lola was at the counter with her obstetrics textbook. She set down her pencil. "The 4 women," she said, "protected, relocated. Their testimony is sealed pending trial." Jan looked at his cup. "The prosecutor says the photographs alone are sufficient. Everything else is—" His word was redundant. He said the photographs are redundant in the best possible way. She nodded. She thought about the glass in the photographs, the counteragent ratios she had documented with the compulsive thoroughness of a first-year medical student who had learned that documentation was the closest thing to certainty available in an uncertain world. She thought about the face in the doorway, Jehoon's face, checking whether his work was finished. She thought about the 4 women in a hospital in New Jersey, speaking to investigators with the clarity of people who had decided that invisible was over. "Good," she said. "There's something else," Jan said. She looked at him. "The host, the man from the event in Seoul, the one who was poisoned." He held her gaze carefully. "He has been cooperating with the task force for 6 months, independent of us, independent of the photographs. He has been building a case against the network from the inside since the night someone tried to kill him." He paused. He told the investigators that a woman saved his life that night, that he never knew her name, that he had been trying to find her for 8 months. She was still. "He filed a formal statement with the task force," Jan said. "He wants to testify on her behalf. He knows she was trafficked. He understands it was because of what she saw and photographed. Jan stopped. Something moved in his easy face. Something genuine. He said, and I am quoting because Minjun asked me to relay this exactly. He said, "I owe her everything I have left. If she needs anything at all, she only has to ask." Lola looked at the counter. She thought about being 23 years old in a side room in Seoul, working by emergency light on a man she could not see, with her second-year medical kit and her toxicology rotation and the specific stubbornness that her mother had called ijokao. She thought about the blanket placed over her sleeping form. She thought about the thank you spoken at 3 a.m. into the dark. She pressed her hands flat on the counter. "Tell him," she said, "that I don't need anything. Tell him the debt is settled." She paused. "And tell him to take care of himself." Jan looked at her for a moment. He nodded. He did not say anything else, which was the correct response, and she had come to understand that Jan's silences were as precisely calibrated as everything else about him. He stood to leave. Stopped. Lola. It was the first time he had used her name without a sentence around it. Just the name, placed in the air by itself, carrying something. For what it's worth. He looked at his cup. I have known Minjin for 31 years. And I have been beside him for every significant thing that has happened in his life, including the things that should not have happened, and the things that were his fault, and the things that were not. He paused. I have never seen him, not once in 31 years, be the thing he is now. He looked at her. I wanted you to know that, whatever you are deciding, whatever you are still weighing. He set down the cup. I wanted you to know. He left. She stood at the counter for a long time after the elevator closed. The arrest happened on a Thursday. She knew it was happening. Minjin had told her the night before, sitting at the kitchen island at 11 p.m. With his tea and the city behind him, and the particular quality of stillness that she now knew was not absence, but depth. He had told her the timeline, the location, the procedure. He had told her in the same direct, precise way he told her everything, without softening it, without over-explaining it, treating her as someone who was owed the full information and was capable of receiving it. Will you watch? She had asked. No, he had said. I will be here. He had been here. All day Thursday in the apartment, not at his office or his meetings or any of the places that constituted the operational life she had glimpsed in fragments over 6 weeks. Here. In the kitchen in the morning when she came out. At the island in the afternoon, you working from the laptop but present. The particular presence she had become attuned to. The awareness of another person in a space that registered in her body before her mind confirmed it. She had not asked him to stay. He had not explained that he was staying. It had simply been the arrangement, reached without negotiation, in the way their arrangements had been reaching themselves since the beginning. At 2:14 in the afternoon, Yeon sent a message. Done. She read it. She set the phone down on the counter. She pressed both hands against her belly, and she felt the baby move. A long, rolling motion, like a tide coming in, and she held the weight of it. She had told the 4 women she would get them a courtroom. She had not known, when she said it, whether it was a promise she could keep. She had said it because it was the right thing, and because saying the right thing, in her experience, was the first step toward making it true. The courtroom was coming. I know, she whispered to the baby. I know. From the living room, she heard Minjin set down his laptop. She heard him stand. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. The pace she knew now, the particular rhythm of a man who moved through spaces with the same deliberate efficiency he applied to everything. 3 knocks on the kitchen doorway, which was open, which had been open since the night she told him the truth, which she had stopped closing because the habit of leaving it closed had belonged to a different version of the situation than the one she was currently in. He knocked anyway. She looked up. Yes, she said. He came in. He looked at her face, the reading of it that he had developed over 6 weeks, the specific attention he paid to her expressions that she had stopped trying to neutralize, because neutralizing it required energy she no longer wanted to spend in his direction. Yeon messaged. She said, Yes, it's done. Yes. She looked at the window, the city below, the October light catching the tops of the buildings, the particular gold of late afternoon in a season that was turning. She thought about a warehouse in Queens 6 weeks ago. The cold concrete under her bare feet. The laughter from a room full of people who had decided she was not worth the breath it would take to bid. The silence that stopped like a cut wire. She thought about the current that had moved through the room when his voice said 50 million. She thought about not knowing. About standing on that platform and not knowing who he was. About carrying his child for 7 months and not knowing. About being saved by a man whose face she never saw and carrying the memory of his voice for 8 months like a song she could not place, and then placing it in a warehouse at the worst and most improbable moment, and choosing to keep it to herself until she understood the shape of the thing she was inside. She thought about the shape of it now. "I want to go outside," she said. He looked at her. "Not far," she said. I have not been outside in 6 weeks. I want to stand in the actual city for a few minutes. I want to feel the ground." She looked at him. "Is it safe?" "With me?" he said. "Yes." She nodded. She went to get her coat. The one Jan had brought in week 2, charcoal wool. The right size? And she put it on over the swell of her belly, and she checked the mirror, and she looked at herself for a moment, the way she had not looked at herself in 6 weeks. 23 years old. Nigerian. A medical student who was a year behind and had the documentation to catch up. 7 months pregnant. Zip tie bruises faded to almost nothing. A woman who had been in a warehouse 6 weeks ago and was standing in a Manhattan apartment now, in a coat that fit, and shoes that were hers, and a life that was not rebuilt, being built, which was different. Rebuilding implied returning to something previous. What she was doing was new construction, from the foundation up, and she was choosing every material herself. She turned from the mirror. He was waiting at the door. The city in October had the quality she had been carrying in her memory for 6 weeks. The cold that was not the cold of the warehouse, the particular clean bite of outdoor air after a season had turned, the smell of the street that was exhaust and coffee and the turned leaves in the planters outside the building, and something that was simply New York, the specific olfactory signature of a place that had absorbed the lives of 10 million people and wore them all at once. She stood on the sidewalk and she breathed. He stood beside her, close. Not 3 feet. The careful preserved distance was gone. Had been gone since the kitchen 3 weeks ago. Since his hand against her face and the baby moving and the door in her chest swinging open. Beside her, in the way of a person who had decided where they stood and had stopped treating it as a provisional arrangement. She did not say anything, neither did he. They stood on the sidewalk in front of a glass tower on the west side, and she breathed the October air and let the city exist around her, the taxis and the delivery bikes and the man arguing on his phone at the corner, and the woman with the dog who looked at Lola's belly and smiled the involuntary smile of a stranger encountering a pregnancy on a good day. She smiled back. It surprised her, the ease of it, the way the smile came without calculation. Without the assessment she had been running on every human interaction for 6 weeks. A stranger on a sidewalk had smiled at her belly, and she had smiled back, and it had taken less than a second and cost her nothing. "I used to walk everywhere," she said, "when I first got here. Every weekend I walked a different neighborhood. I had a list." She looked at the street. "I got through 11 of them before." She stopped. "I have a lot of neighborhoods left." "Yes," he said. "You do?" She looked at him. He was looking at the street, at the taxis and the delivery bikes and the ordinary machinery of the city that had been running this whole time, through everything, the way it always ran. His profile in the October light. The jaw she had learned. The scar at his collarbone, invisible under his coat now but present, as it was always present in her understanding of him. The physical record of something survived. "I have been thinking," she said. About what comes after the trial. He looked at her. The fellowship reinstatement? She said. Jan says the paperwork is almost through. Another 3 weeks and I can re-enroll. She paused. The residency application cycle opens in January. I missed this year's, but January is possible. If I can get the documentation in order and the recommendation letters and... She stopped. I am talking through a plan that involves living in New York and applying for a residency program while being the mother of a newborn. She looked at him. I want you to understand that I am not making assumptions about what any of this means for Lola, he said. I am not asking you for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. The baby is mine and I am capable of... Lola. She stopped. I heard you, he said. I understand what you are not asking for. He held her gaze. I want to tell you what I am offering. Not what you asked for. What I am offering. He paused. The pause of a man assembling something he had been assembling for weeks and was now ready to put in front of her in full. I am offering a home. For you and for her. Not out of obligation. I want to be very precise about that, because you are very precise about things, and you deserve precision in return. Not because of the baby, though the baby is. He stopped. Something moved through his expression. The thing she had been watching build in him for 6 weeks. The thing that arrived in pieces in the specific observations about meals and the obstetrics textbook and the 3 knocks and the hello spoken into the dark. It was fully assembled now. It was fully visible. The baby is everything I did not know I was missing until she moved under my hand, and I understood what was on the other side of the wall I have been building for 38 years. She looked at him. Me, but the offer is not because of her, he said. The offer is because of you. Because you sat in the back of my car on the worst night of your life and built a case against me from available data and told me my attempt to make myself smaller was not working and was never going to work. He paused. Because you stood in my kitchen and told me the truth even when it cost you, and asked me to be the version that thought first, and then watched to see if I could manage it? He paused again. Because in 6 weeks, you have made me knock on open doors and leave books on counters and sit at a kitchen island every evening, saying one true thing about food, because it was the only acceptable currency for what I actually wanted to say. He looked at her. I am offering a home because I do not want to do any of those things in a separate building from where you are. The city moved around them. The taxis, the delivery bikes, the October air. She looked at him for a long moment. Since she looked at the man who had bid $50 million on a stranger because he could not sit there anymore, who had covered her with a blanket in Seoul before dawn without leaving his name, who knocked on open doors and put textbooks on counters, and said one true thing about every meal. You should know, she said, that I am not easy to live with. I document everything. I photograph environments out of habit. I cook at 11 p.m. when I cannot sleep. I will argue with you about medical decisions regarding the baby, because I am going to be a doctor, and that is not a dynamic you should expect to manage easily. She held his gaze. I am also not going to disappear into your life. I have my own life, and I am building it, and it will exist alongside whatever this is, not inside it. Yes, he said. I know. You know. I have been watching you build it for 6 weeks. He said. I would not want the version that didn't. She looked at him. Okay, she said. Okay. I want to keep walking, she said. I have been inside for 6 weeks. I want to walk. He fell into step beside her. They walked. The city moved with them and around them, and the October air was clean and cold, and the baby moved at 4:47 in the afternoon, off her usual schedule, and Lola pressed her palm to the side of her belly, and Minjun looked at her hand and placed his beside it without asking. And they walked like that down the west side of Manhattan in the October light. Two people and a third who was making her presence known. Building something new from the ground up, choosing every material. She thought about the warehouse, the platform, the bare feet on cold concrete, the room full of people who had decided she was not worth the breath it would take to bid, and the silence that had fallen like a wall coming down, and the voice from the back that had said 50 million and changed the temperature of everything. She thought about not knowing. She had not known who he was when he saved her. He had not known who she was when she saved him. They had been in the same room in Seoul for 4 hours and in the same warehouse in Queens for 20 minutes and in the same apartment for 6 weeks, and the full shape of what connected them had arrived in pieces, not all at once, not with a single revelation, but the way all true things arrived, incrementally, through the accumulation of small, accurate observations until the picture was complete. She thought, this is how it works. Not the way stories arranged it, not the recognition scene, not the moment of dramatic discovery, not the look across a room where two people understood everything at once. This was how it actually worked. You saved someone in the dark without knowing their name. You were saved in a warehouse without knowing theirs. You spent 6 weeks in proximity, building the picture piece by piece, and when the picture was complete, you looked at it and understood that the accumulation was not coincidence. It was just everything that had happened, adding up to exactly this. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Lagos, the generator humming. The Yoruba song she had never learned the full words to, but knew by feel. Mama, she thought, look where the roots went. The trial took 8 months. She was not present for all of it. She was present for her testimony. 2 hours on a Wednesday in April, 8 months pregnant with her second, in a federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan, with Jan in the gallery and Minjun outside in the hallway, because she had told him she needed to do this part alone, and he had said yes in the way he said everything that cost him, without argument, without negotiation, with the quiet fidelity of a man who had decided that the things she needed were the things he would provide, regardless of what they required of him. She had testified clearly and completely, the way she did everything, with precision, without performance, with the particular authority of a woman who had spent 8 months carrying the truth in her body before she ever had the chance to speak it aloud. She had described the event in Seoul, the poisoning, the 4 hours in the side room, the photographs, the cloud account. She had described the 4 months of captivity, the holding facility, the auction. She had done it in the flat, specific language of a clinician giving a case history, not because she was suppressing anything, but because the flat, specific language was the most honest language she owned, and she was not going to translate her experience into something more palatable for a room that owed her the unpalatable version. The prosecutor had asked, "Why at the end? Miss Adeyemi, is there anything else you would like this court to know?" She had looked at the court, at the jury, at the specific faces of 12 people who had been sitting in this room for 8 months receiving evidence and were now receiving her. "The 4 women who were in that facility with me," she said. "I want this court to know their names." She said them, all 4, slowly, clearly, into the record. "They existed," she said. "Before this, during this, and after this. Whatever this verdict is, they existed." The courtroom was quiet. She stepped down from the stand. The verdict came in on a Tuesday in August. She was at the hospital when Jan called. Not as a patient, as a doctor. She was 3 months into her residency, and she had her white coat on and her stethoscope around her neck and a patient's chart in her hand when her phone lit up in her pocket, and she stepped into the hallway and answered it. "Guilty," Jan said. "All counts." Here she stood in the hospital hallway, white coat, stethoscope, the chart in her hand, the fluorescent lights and the particular smell of a hospital that she had loved since she was 12 years old in Lagos, deciding what she was going to do with the stubbornness her mother had given her. "All counts," she said. "Every single one," Jan said. His voice was not his professional voice, not the managed, efficient voice of logistics and arrangements. Something under it. The voice of a person for whom something had just concluded that had been a long time concluding. Lola. He paused. All of them. She stood in the hallway. She thought about the 4 women, about the courtroom she had promised them from the back of a black car on the worst night of any of their lives. She thought about saying, "I will get you a courtroom," and not knowing if it was a promise she could keep, and keeping it anyway. "Thank you, Jan," she said. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand pressed to the wall. Not the counter, not her belly, the wall. The solid institutional wall of a hospital she was working in because she had rebuilt her life from the foundation up and chosen every material. And this material, this coat, this stethoscope, this chart, this hallway, was hers. She breathed. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked back to her patient. She told Minjun that night. Their daughter was 14 months old and asleep in the room at the end of the hallway, the room that had been hers before it became the baby's, the one with the lock that still worked from the inside, because Minjun had understood from the beginning that a door that could be locked was a door that could also be chosen open. She was sleeping with the particular authority of a child who had decided from the very beginning that she was going to keep going regardless of the conditions outside, and had maintained this position consistently for 14 months with an intensity that Minjun described as, his exact word, said with the specific expression that arrived on his face when their daughter did something that surprised him into honesty. Remarkable. She was remarkable. She was 14 months old, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw, and a laugh that came out of her like something that had been waiting its whole short life to be released. And when Minjun held her, he did it with the careful, complete attention he gave to everything he had decided mattered. He was in the kitchen when Lola came home. Tea, the laptop, the city behind him. The same arrangement as 6 weeks after the warehouse, the same island, the same cup, the same quality of attention that lifted from the screen immediately when she came in, completely, as though nothing on it had been worth keeping. She stood in the kitchen doorway. "Guilty," she said. "All counts." He set down the cup. He looked at her, the full reading of her face, the vocabulary he had spent 14 months expanding. The specific language of this face that he had been learning since a warehouse in Queens and had not finished learning and did not expect to finish learning, which was, he had come to understand, the entire point. He stood up. He came around the island. He stopped in front of her and he put his hands on her face, both of them, the full warm frame of both palms against her cheeks, the way he had held her in this kitchen 14 months ago when the baby moved under his hand for the first time. She looked at him. "You got them their courtroom," he said. "Yes," she said. I did. Something moved through his expression. The thing she had first seen in pieces in the warehouse and had been watching fully assemble itself for 14 months. Not cold, not controlled, not any of the versions he had been before she walked into his life in a gray dress with bare feet on cold concrete. Something that lived on the other side of all of that. Something that was simply and completely his, available to her. No cost of entry, no threshold required. Lola, he said. Yes, I need you to know something. She waited. The night in Seoul, he said. I have thought about it, many times. The 4 hours in that room, waking in the morning and understanding that someone had stayed beside me through the worst of it and been gone before I was coherent enough to find out who. He paused. I covered you with a blanket. That is all I could do. You were asleep, and I was barely standing, and it was everything I had, and it was not enough for what you had done. He looked at her. I thought about it for 8 months. I looked. I did not have a name, a face, anything. I had a woman in a dark room who had kept me alive and left before morning, and I spent 8 months. He stopped. And then I walked into a warehouse in Queens. She looked at him. And I did not know. He said, I want you to understand that. I stood at the back of that room and I looked at the platform and I did not know it was you. I did not know the woman I had been looking for was the woman on that platform. I did not know any of it. He held her gaze. I bought you because I could not sit there anymore. Because the room was doing something I could not be a witness to. Because something in the way you were standing, the spine, the chin, the complete refusal to give them what they wanted, was the most dignified thing I had ever seen, and I could not leave it there. She was very still. I did not know, he said. And I need you to know that I did not know, because I need you to understand. He paused, the pause of a man arriving at the sentence he had been building toward and finding it exactly where he left it. I need you to understand that everything that happened after, everything I felt, everything that built in this kitchen over 6 weeks, every true thing I said about every meal, because it was the only currency I had for what I actually wanted to say. None of it was because of the baby. None of it was because of soul. None of it was because of obligation or debt, or the specific weight of everything that connected us before we knew it connected us. He looked at her. It was because of you, he said. Just you. The woman who told me my attempt to make myself smaller was not working. Who asked me to be the version that thought first and watched to see if I could manage it. Who cooked at 11 p.m. And documented environments out of habit and argued about everything worth arguing about and rebuilt her life from the ground up in front of me and let me watch. His thumbs moved, gently, the slow trace of both thumbs against her cheekbones. I would have found you, he said, if I had known your name after Soul, if I had had anything to go on. I would have found you. He paused. I am grateful that I didn't. Because this way, 6 weeks and 6 months and 14 months and everything that built between us before either of us knew the full shape of it, this way, I know it is real. I know it was never obligation. I know it was never debt. He held her gaze. I know what it was. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had covered her with a blanket in Seoul and not left his name, who had stood at the back of a warehouse and paid $50 million on a stranger he was looking for without knowing he was looking for her, who had bid on a woman he did not know and taken home the mother of his child Without knowing, she was the mother of his child, who had knocked on open doors and put textbooks on counters and said one true thing every evening for 6 weeks, while the full shape of everything assembled itself between them. She thought about not knowing. She had spent 14 months thinking about not knowing, about how it was the condition of the whole thing. Neither of them had known in Seoul, in Queens, in the kitchen on the first night. They had moved toward each other without the full picture, without the complete information, driven by something that operated below the level of knowledge. And the picture had assembled itself anyway. Piece by piece, in the dark and in the light, as in warehouses and kitchens and hospital hallways and October sidewalks, until the morning she looked at it and it was complete. "I know what it was, too," she said. He looked at her. "Is?" she said. "What it is?" Something broke open in his expression, not dramatically. The way dawn broke, quietly, completely, the kind of light that did not announce itself but was simply everywhere at once, changing everything it touched. He kissed her. Right there, in the kitchen, with the city 40 floors below, and their daughter asleep at the end of the hallway, and the verdict in, and the case closed, and the life they were building from the foundation up, arranged around them in the specific form of an ordinary Tuesday evening, that was also, because all ordinary Tuesday evenings were also this if you had earned them, everything. She kissed him back. Later, she stood at the window. Their daughter was awake, had been awake for 40 minutes, the specific alert wakefulness of a 14-month-old who had finished sleeping and required the world to acknowledge this. Minjun had her. She had heard him go in. The quiet competence of a man who had learned, over 14 months, that small people in the middle of the night required a specific kind of presence and had developed it with the same precision he applied to everything that mattered. Lola stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the city. She looked at it the way she had not been able to look at it for a long time. Not as a thing that had taken from her, not as the place that had swallowed her whole, as a city. Just a city. 10 million people and their 10 million separate lives going about themselves in the dark, indifferent and continuous and magnificent. She pressed her hand to the window. She thought about Lagos Island, the generator in the evening, her mother's voice, low and certain, singing the Yoruba song she had never learned the full words to, but knew by feel. The kitchen that had been the whole world when she was 4 years old, small enough to contain everything that mattered. She thought about all the distance between that kitchen and this window. The years, the library in Lagos, the university in Ibadan, the fellowship in Seoul, the night in a side room with a medical kit and a man she could not see, the car in Brooklyn, the 4 months, the warehouse, the voice that said 50 million. She thought about her daughter, asleep now at the end of the hallway, held by a man who had been looking for her mother for 8 months without knowing what he was looking for. She thought about what it meant that her daughter existed, that the night in Seoul, the specific alignment of that night, had been necessary, that she had needed to be in that room with those skills at that moment for the chain of events to run the way it had run. We're all the way to this window, this city, this ordinary Tuesday evening that was also everything. She did not believe in the architecture of fate. She was a scientist and a doctor, and she believed in evidence and in the compounding of small decisions into outcomes that looked, from a distance, like they had been arranged by something larger than the decisions themselves. But she believed in this, in the specific improbability of it, the student visa and the catering shift, and the medical kit, and the cloud account, and the $50 million and the blanket placed over her sleeping form before dawn. She believed in the accumulation of it. From the hallway, footsteps. Then Minjin at the kitchen doorway, their daughter against his shoulder. One small hand fisted in the collar of his shirt, eyes open and serious in the way she was serious about being awake and ensuring everyone understood this. He looked at Lola at the window. She looked at him in the doorway. He crossed the room. He stopped beside her. Their daughter turned her head and looked at the city with the wide, grave attention of someone encountering something vast for the first time. The 10,000 lights, the skyline's jaw, the dark river at the edge of it all. Big, their daughter said. It was her word for things that exceeded her current vocabulary. She had been using it for 3 weeks for the ocean and the sky and the building's lobby, and now for this, the city at night, spread below them, the specific enormity of a place that contained 10 million lives. Yes, Minjin said. He looked at their daughter, looking at the city. He looked at Lola. It is. Lola looked at them. At the man who had saved her without knowing he was saving the mother of his child. And the child who existed because a woman had saved a man in the darkened soul, and the city that had taken her and given her back something it had not been trying to give. She reached out. She took her daughter from him. She held the warm, solid, 14-month weight of her against her chest and looked at the city and felt her daughter's hand close around her finger. The grip, automatic and total. The grip of someone who had decided from the beginning that she was going to hold on. Minjun stood beside them. His hand found the small of her back, warm, steady. The specific warmth of a presence that had been present through everything and intended to remain. The city did not stop. The taxis, the lights, the 10 million lives going about themselves in the dark. Nobody ever told me, she said softly. To herself, to her daughter, to the city, well, to the version of herself that had stood on a platform 6 weeks and 14 months ago with bare feet on cold concrete and not known any of this was coming. Nobody ever told me it was going to be this big. Minjun looked at her. He understood what she meant. She knew he understood. Now you can see it, he said. Whenever you want. She looked at the city. She looked at the 10,000 lights. She looked at the river at the edge of it, and the sky above it, and the specific boundless quality of a view that did not end, that kept going past the frame, that went on further than she could see from any window. She thought about the warehouse, the platform, the gray dress and the bare feet, and the room full of people who had decided she was not worth the breath it would take to bid. She thought about the voice from the back that had said 50 million. She thought about not knowing, about how she had stood on that platform and not known who he was, and he had stood at the back of that room and not known who she was, and between them, in the dark and in the light and in every kitchen and hallway and October sidewalk since, they had been building the picture piece by piece until the morning it was complete. She looked at the city. Subscribe and turn on your notifications, she thought. Not to the city, but to the story, to the specific shape of it, to the thing that had started on a platform in Queens and arrived here, at this window, at this ordinary Tuesday evening. Share this in the comments. Tell someone what moment hit you. Because if this story did something to you, if you held your breath when the voice said 50 million, if you felt something when he put his hands over his face, if you have been carrying this since the warehouse, then you know what it is. It is the story of two people who saved each other without knowing, and only found out at the end. She pressed her daughter closer. She looked at the city. The lights kept burning. The river kept moving. The tide came in, and the tide went out, and the story that had started in a warehouse in Queens with a voice from the back of a room and $50 million and a pregnant woman on a platform who refused to give the room a single thing it wanted. That story ended here. Not with a revelation scene. Not with the dramatic moment of discovery that stories arranged for you. The look across a room where everything was suddenly understood. It ended with two people standing at a window in the dark, and a child between them who had been the secret connecting thread of everything, and the city going on below them, and both of them knowing, fully, completely, without any missing pieces left, the whole shape of what they were inside, and finding it, after everything, to be enough, to be more than enough, to be, in fact, the whole world. If you are still here, if you stayed through all of it, then you know. You were there for the warehouse and the car and the kitchen and the photographs and the floor and the courtroom and the window. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Drop in the comments the moment that stopped your breath. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the right person will find you even in the dark, especially in the dark, even when neither of you knows what you're looking for. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, some stories don't announce themselves. They just arrive, and you only understand what they were at the very end.